Good morning. It's Thursday morning, and welcome. Maybe the gold standard of excellence in American history would be the person of Abraham Lincoln. It's interesting that when we started talking about happiness, we did quote him that people in America are about as happy as they want to be. He held the Union together with a force of his will and a stubbornness of his patriotism. And I don't think it's much debatable that without Abraham Lincoln, we would not have the Union. As a young boy, my father took us to Washington from New York, and I went to the Lincoln Memorial, and I was stunned. I'll never forget going into that place and seeing that magnificent seated statue of Abraham Lincoln, and above him is the quote chiseled onto the marble: "In this temple, as in the hearts of the American people for whom he saved the Union, the memory of Abraham Lincoln is enshrined forever." And I was just stunned by that. He might be easily the most respected and most admired president in our history. But one would wonder how many of his contemporaries noticed. He faced forces that we still see virulent today: the disruption and the disunion, the stubborn allegiance to states' rights, the willingness not to take any central government seriously. He faced forces which were overwhelming, not just from the South, but from the North as well. It is fair to say that the Confederacy hated him, loathed him, and certainly had an assassination verdict on him, would easily have loved him dead. Abuse poured on him from almost every direction. His ancestry was mocked. We think it's charming that his father was a backwoodsman in Kentucky. His lack of formal education, which we revere, that he learned to write in a 3-walled house. One side of the house was dirt floor, that he learned to make his own pencils and use coal to write on boards, wooden boards. We warm to that story, but in his political and professional life, he was ridiculed for a lack of education. His appearance was maligned. He was ungainly. He had very big feet, and they flapped when he walked down hallways. His personal morality was assailed. He was considered a degenerate. He was called some things. He was called a gorilla from the way he walked. He was called a Yahoo, which comes from Jonathan Swift, Gulliver's Travels. The Yahoos were a degenerate race of people with malignant intentions. He was called an idiot. Abraham Lincoln was clinically depressed. I think most scholars say that. There's a story of him wandering around the White House late at night and having a dream that he was in the rotunda of the Capitol and there was a state funeral going on, and it was his funeral. Because he asked a guard who was standing at attention, "Who's in the casket?" And he said, "It's President Lincoln, sir." And then 3 days later, he was assassinated in Washington. It's a shocking story. He had four boys. Edward Lincoln died before he was 4 years old. William Lincoln died when he was 13. Robert Todd lived to an adult life, but Tad Thomas, whom the president called Tad because he wiggled like a tadpole, he died at the age of 17. Lincoln was called a barbarian, an idiot, a gorilla, and a yahoo. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who was a great suffragette and a great spokeswoman for abolition, considered him dishonest Abe. Susan B. Anthony, the great activist and abolitionist and woman suffragette, worked tirelessly for his defeat in 1864, the election of 1864. She was supporting George McClellan. George McClellan, are you serious? William Lloyd Garrison, the journalist, abolitionist, when Lincoln was assassinated, he said that he thought the assassination was providential. When I was in graduate school, I used to go to the Lincoln Memorial late at night, 11:30, 12 o'clock. Back in the day, you could park your car right in the Oval, walk right up. Nobody was ever in the monument, except the guard, who was in a little booth because it was so cold in the winter. And I would often sometimes sit there. Phillips Brooks, the evangelist, the Episcopal priest, rector of Trinity Episcopal Church, Copley Square in Boston, iconic preacher, one of the great lights of the American Episcopal Church, was asked by Mrs. Sullivan, Annie Sullivan, to help Helen Keller learn about Christ. Because by this time she was becoming coherent with sign language and touch. She would touch Annie Sullivan's face with a balloon and get the sounds and the vibration. And Phillips Brooks, being an enormously effective preacher, brought in a bust of Abraham Lincoln. And Helen Keller touched it, massaged it, and then turned to Annie Sullivan after a period of time and said, "This is the face of a man who has suffered greatly." People are about as happy as they want to be. He took a lot of abuse. He used to ride a buggy out in Washington. And a woman once saw him in the buggy and said, "You, sir, are the ugliest man I've ever seen." And Lincoln said, "Well, madam, there's not much I can do about that." And she said, "Yes, there is, sir. Stay home." What happy people know how the science of happiness can change your life for the better. That's the name and title of the book. Dan Baker and Cameron Stouth, Stauth. A good book. Okay, a little show and tell. A doctor by the name of Martin Sigelman put dogs in boxes and cages. One box had the opening, one cage had the opening, one did not. He subjected them to a mild irritant of electrical current, nothing damaging, but they were unhappy being in it on the base of the cage. Those dogs with the door left immediately, and those dogs who didn't have an opening endured it. After a period of time, and it had progressed, he moved it to another kind of model. 2 boxes connected, or 2 cages connected with an opening. This one subjected to the irritant, this one having no irritant at all. He put all the dogs in this cage, turned on the current. The dogs who had learned to escape went into the new room. The dogs which had been sequestered and learned to endure the irritant stayed, oddly enough, stayed. And what they both decided, what all the doctors decided, was that we have a tolerance for unhappiness. And we can stay and learn it. And we can learn helplessness. We can stay in a place with no exit and not imagine there's an exit even when there is one before us. I thought it was fascinating to experience, and that is why we freeze and why we flee. rather than find the opening that is usually, if not always, there. Powerlessness, we've experienced a lot of it, I think, even now with COVID. Powerlessness, the inability or the unwillingness or the uncertainty as to how to manage our circumstances. There are circumstances which tend to overwhelm us. Yes, it's true. Catastrophes, death which is sudden and not understandable. That's all what life will sometimes offer. But there are circumstances where we learn to be tolerant of needless inconveniences and needless sufferings. We are willing to wait until the stress leaves rather than find a solution. And powerlessness can be not just the inability to conceive of a change, but it's the fear of the change. I might fear that I am not enough, that I am not able to do something. And I've said this a little bit last time after Mary's attack, and we were in the law office, and I was distraught. I had no ability to conceptualize a way out until somebody showed me how to do that. We talked about the 4 Ds of happiness. Discovery, what is it? Discovery, dreams, design, and deliverance, right? You must discover your strengths. You must dream about a solution. You must have a plan, and then you know where to attack. There are the 4 Ds of happiness. But he also has 3 Ps of unhappiness, and they are permanence, they are personification, and they are pervasiveness. Permanence is that the more intense something is, the more the subject believes that it will never end. And you've all been able to say to people, oh, it won't last forever. Yes, it will. Children particularly tell you that. Permanence, the more intense it is, it won't end. A conviction that I am going to be in this situation forever. And I certainly understand that. Permanence is the first P in the cycle of helplessness, that this is going to last forever. Number 2, I guess, is personification, that the problem is my fault. And we are often encouraged to feel this way. Well, why did you do it? It's your own fault. You hear that all the time, especially children. It's your own fault. Well, of course it is. But you don't have to double down on it. There are people, and there are people who are plenty, who will tell you that your life sorrows are your fault. That if you were stronger, if you had more skills, if you had this, if you had that, if you had this, if you had that, you wouldn't be in the situation. And then the last one is pervasiveness. Namely, this problem I'm experiencing is universal in my life, and it affects every other part of my being. When I said last time when Mary was attacked and I was in the elevator, I certainly felt it was permanent. I certainly felt it was my fault, and I certainly felt it was pervasive. That my whole life is now on a standstill. I'm going to have to simply buckle up and endure it. And none of those are true. Life is not permanent. Sorrow. Jesus said something very interesting. Your sorrow will be turned to joy. It is temporary. No matter how intense, it is temporary. And there's a way out of the box. Sometimes people have to tell you where it is. It's not a do-it-yourself program, but there's a way out. It is not permanent. It is not your fault. You have contributed. Of course you have. In alcoholic recovery, what did you have? What was your role in this? A role, not responsibility. That's total. We all play a part in the drama of our lives. And lastly, of course, Pervasiveness, it doesn't affect other parts of your life. Unhappiness at my work doesn't make it unhappiness in my marriage. My happiness in my marriage doesn't make it unhappy in my work. I don't have to drink my way through everything. I don't have to drug my way through everything. We can isolate our problems. It's really fascinating. I really do recommend the book, What Happy People Know, The Science of Happiness. You can get it on Amazon pretty quickly. And you'll realize that I've ripped off all these things. I've just ripped them off, but I give him credit. I give Dan Baker credit. I really do. Well, I hope we have one more of these, which we will do next Thursday. And then I'm going to go on a vacation. I don't know where. I don't know how. But after my intense work week of 3 or 4 hours a week of work, I'm going to take a break. It's well deserved. It's well deserved. It's what happy people know. And then when we get back from our vacation, and maybe whenever happens, we may kick it up again and do something else. Or maybe we'll sing on the road again. Okay, will you be well? God bless you. Stay safe. COVID evidently is a perfect example of us feeling helpless. It's a perfect opportunity for us to feel that all our problems are pervasive, it's permanent, and it's our fault. And oh boy, this is the time that tries our souls. We were warned yesterday by Dr. Fauci that this could be 100,000 cases a day if we don't wise up and get it straight. Wear the mask. Stay home if you have to. And if you go out, wear the mask. It's mandatory as an ethical person. It is utterly mandatory. Be well, God bless, and see you soon.